It was October 5th in the year 1974 when American Dave Koontz completed the first around-the-world journey on foot, taking 4 years and 21 pairs of shoes to complete the 14,500-mile journey across the land masses of 4 continents. He left his hometown of Waseca, Minnesota on June 20th in 1970. Near the end of his journey in 1974, he explained the reasons for his epic walk. Quote, "I was tired of Waseca, tired of my job, tired of a lot of little people who don't want to think, and tired of my wife." Unquote. During the long journey, he took on sponsors and helped raise money for UNICEF. He was accompanied by his brother, John, but in 1972, John Koontz was shot by bandits in Afghanistan, and he continued his journey, and Dave was wounded. After returning to Minnesota to recuperate, Koontz traveled back to Afghanistan and continued his global journey with another brother, Peter. Peter had to drop out later for health reasons, and Dave Koontz completed his trek alone, returning to Waseca on October 5th in 1974. American George Schilling boasted of a round-the-world journey nearly 100 years before, but his feat was never verified. Another American, Arthur Blessitt, holds the record for the greatest distance walked in most countries visited, though he was propelled by a purpose other than record book fame. Since 1969, Blessitt has walked more than 34,500 miles, visiting 290 countries on 6 continents, all the while carrying a collapsible 12-foot cross and preaching Christianity. On October 5th in the year 1989, the Dalai Lama, the exiled religious and political leader of Tibet, is awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in recognition of his nonviolent campaign to end the Chinese domination of Tibet. The 14th Dalai Lama was born as Tenzin Gyatso in a hamlet in northeastern Tibet in 1935. He was of Tibetan parentage, and Tibetan monks visited him when he was 3 and announced him to be the reincarnation of the late 13th Dalai Lama. The monks were guided by omens, portents, and dreams that indicated where the next incarnation of the Dalai Lama could be found. At age 5, Tenzin Gyatso was taken to the Tibetan capital of Lhasa and installed as the leader of Tibetan Buddhism. Tibet, a large region situated in the plateaus and mountains of Central Asia, had been ruled by the Dalai Lamas since the 14th century. Tibetans resisted efforts by China to gain greater control over the region in the early 20th century, and during the Chinese Revolution of 1911 through 1912, the Tibetans expelled Chinese officials and civilians and formally declared their independence. In October 1950, Chinese Communist forces invaded Tibet and quickly overwhelmed the country's poorly equipped army. The young Dalai Lama appealed to the United Nations for support, but his entreaties were denied. In 1951, a Tibetan-Chinese peace agreement was signed, in which the nation became a national autonomous region of China, supposedly under the rule of the Dalai Lama, but actually under the control of a Chinese Communist Commission. The highly religious people of Tibet suffered under Communist China's anti-religious legislation. After years of scattered protests in Tibet, a full-scale revolt broke out in March of 1959, and the Dalai Lama fled with 100,000 other Tibetans as Chinese troops crushed the uprising. He began in exile in India, settling at Dharamshala in the Himalayan foothills, where he established a democratically based shadow Tibetan government. Back in Tibet, the Chinese adopted brutally repressive measures against the Tibetans, provoking charges from the Dalai Lama of genocide. With the beginning of the Cultural Revolution in China, the Chinese suppression of Tibetan Buddhism escalated, and practice of the religion was banned, and thousands of monasteries were destroyed. The religious practice ban was lifted in 1976, but suppression in Tibet continued. From his base at Dharamshala, the Dalai Lama traveled the world, successfully drawing international attention to the continuing Chinese suppression of the Tibetan people and their religion. Major anti-Chinese riots broke out in Lhasa in 1987, and in 1988, China declared martial law in the region. Seeking peace, the Dalai Lama abandoned his demand for Tibetan independence and called for a true self-governing Tibet, with China in charge of defense and foreign affairs. China rejected the offer. The following year, the Dalai Lama was the recipient of the 1989 Nobel Prize for Peace. His autobiography, Freedom in Exile, was published in 1990. Tibet continued to suffer from periodic unrest in the 1990s, and China came under criticism from Western governments for its suppression of political and religious freedom there. The Chinese government has since made efforts to moderate its stance in the region, but Tibet remains without self-government. After more than 4 decades of exile, the Dalai Lama continues to travel, publicizing the Tibetan cause. It was October 5th in 2011 that Steve Jobs, the visionary co-founder of Apple Inc., which revolutionized the computer, music, and the mobile communications industries with such devices as the Macintosh, iPod, iPhone, and iPad, continued his eternity at the age of 56 of complications from pancreatic cancer. Born on February 24th in 1955 in San Francisco, California, to unmarried graduate students Joanne Schiebel and Abdul Fattah Jandali, a Syrian immigrant, Jobs was adopted as a baby by Paul Jobs, a Silicon Valley machinist, and his wife Clara. After graduating from high school in Cupertino, California in 1972, Jobs attended Reed College, a liberal art school in Portland, Oregon, for a single semester before dropping out. He later worked briefly for pioneering video game maker Atari in California, traveled to India, and studied Zen Buddhism. In 1976, Jobs and his computer engineer friend Steve Wozniak founded Apple Computer in Jobs' parents' garage in Los Altos, California. As Bloomberg News would later note about Jobs, he had no formal technical training and no real business experience. What he had instead was an appreciation of technology's elegance and a notion that computers could be more than a hobbyist toy or a corporation's workhorse. These machines could be indispensable tools. In 1977, Jobs and Wozniak launched the Apple II, which became the first popular personal computer. In 1980, Apple went public, and Jobs, then in his mid-20s, became a multi-millionaire. 4 years later, Apple debuted the Macintosh, one of the first personal computers to feature a graphical user interface, which allowed people to navigate by pointing and clicking a mouse rather than typing commands. In 1985, Jobs left the company following a power struggle with Apple's board of directors. That same year, he established Next, a business that developed high-performance computers. The machines proved too pricey to gain a wide consumer audience. However, British computer scientist Tim Berners-Lee developed the World Wide Web using a Next workstation. In 1986, Jobs acquired a small computer graphics studio founded by filmmaker George Lucas and rechristened it Pixar Animation Studios. In 1995, Pixar released its first film, Toy Story, the first ever feature-length computer animated movie. It became a huge box office success and was followed by such award-winning hits as Finding Nemo in 2003 and The Incredibles in 2004. In 2006, Walt Disney Company purchased Pixar for more than $7 billion, making Jobs the largest Disney shareholder. In late 1996, Apple, which had floundered without Jobs, announced it would buy Next and hire Jobs as an advisor. The following year, he became Apple's interim CEO. The interim was dropped in 2000. And under his leadership, a nearly bankrupt Apple was transformed into one of the planet's most valuable corporations. A charismatic, demanding perfectionist, Jobs was said to possess the ability to intuit what customers wanted before they knew it themselves. In his trademark jeans and black mock turtleneck, the tech titan turned product launches into highly anticipated events, and Apple introduced a series of innovative digital devices, including the iPod portable music player in 2001, the iPhone in 2007, and the iPad tablet computer in 2010 that became part of everyday modern life. In early 2007, Jobs announced that Cupertino-based Apple was dropping computer from its official moniker to reflect the fact the company's focus had shifted from computers only to mobile electronic devices. Despite a series of medical issues, including surgery in 2004 to remove a pancreatic tumor and a 2009 liver transplant, Jobs continued to lead Apple until August 24th in 2011, when he stepped down as the company's chief executive. 6 weeks later, he continued his eternity at his Palo Alto, California home. At the time of his continuance, Jobs, a father of four, had a net worth estimated at more than $7 billion. According to biographer Walter Isaacson, Jobs, quote, was the greatest business executive of our era, the one most certain to be remembered a century from now. History will place him in the pantheon right next to Thomas Edison and Henry Ford. The historic information, the roles, and documented on this audio file can be verified on history.com.